Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, wherever you are in our wide world. And welcome to another NetHope webinar. My name is Seth Otto, and I'm the Digital Communications Manager here at NetHope and producer of the NetHope webinar series. We're delighted to be joined today by representatives from the United Way of the Greater Triangle. Their stated mission is to eradicate poverty and increase social mobility for everyone in the Greater Triangle. And they will be presenting with Submittable, a social impact platform that helps teams launch, manage, and measure their social impact programs. They'll be talking with us and sharing a case study today about using technology to bring a community together. Today's session will be a fireside chat with our presenters, so make yourselves comfortable. Keep your notepad close and your favorite beverage closer as we get going. Let's go over a bit of housekeeping before we get started. First off, let's make this webinar interactive. Let us know what comes up for you. Please post your comments and questions in the Zoom chat window. The presenters will address them this hour during a Q&A session. And after today's session, please pay attention to your inbox for a follow-up email that we will send your way in the hours following the webinar. The email will include links to the webinar recording, the slides, and any other resources shared during today's presentation and discussion. And we would really appreciate your feedback. Your opinion matters to us, and we use your responses to our webinar survey to improve this webinar series for you and our broader NetHope community. It also provides our presenters with an opportunity to connect with you if you want to, and to share feedback directly with them. So please do fill out our webinar satisfaction survey after today's session. So with all that out of the way, I would like to present today's speakers, Nick Allen, Chief Program Officer, and Jeff Howell, Director of Community Investment at United Way of Greater Triangle. And by way of introduction, I will now hand this webinar off to Sam Kaplan, Vice President of Social Impact at Submittable, who will lead today's discussion. Take it away, Sam.
All right. Thank you so much, Seth and NetHope. So I'm super excited for this opportunity to lead a discussion with Nick and Jeff from the United Way of the Greater Triangle, which is located in Durham, North Carolina, serving 4 counties in that state. And we have a really engaging conversation planned for you today. So we're going to dive in just a minute. I thought to start, I would just do a really brief introduction of myself and of my organization, Submittable. So I'm Sam. I am the Vice President of Social Impact at Submittable. And in my role, I serve as a bit of a subject matter expert, a thought leader in philanthropy and social impact and corporate social responsibility. And I get to spend a lot of my time just hanging out with folks like Nick and Jeff and just learning about all of these really innovative things that they're doing to advance social impact in their communities. Before working at Submittable, I was at the Walmart Foundation, where I was the Director of Technology. And then I moved across town to serve as the Chief Information Officer at the Walton Family Foundation. If you haven't heard of Submittable, we're a social impact platform, and we provide software to organizations like the United Way to help them launch and manage and report on their social impact programs. You can learn more about us at submittable.com. And lastly, our format today is what NetHope calls a fireside chat. So I hope that you will be as excited as I am that we're not going to be going through a bunch of structured slides. Instead, what we're aiming for is really just an engaging conversation. It's mostly unscripted and unrehearsed. So please feel free to join in. You can use the chat, feel free to ask us questions. If anything that we're talking about resonates with you, please feel free to comment. We will do our best to weave those comments and questions into the conversation. And we'll also reserve some time at the end of the discussion for a Q&A. So with that, let's move into some introductions here. So maybe starting with you, Nick, I'd love to hear just a little bit about you and your role at the United Way and really kind of what inspires you to do the work that you do.
Yeah, good morning, folks. Thanks for that, Sam. My name is Nick Allen. I am the Chief Program Officer at the United Way of the Greater Triangle, where our mission is to eradicate poverty and increase social mobility through the power of partnerships. In that role, I have the distinct and unique opportunity to support our community impact team, which includes the way and the strategies and the process of our grant making, includes our marketing and storytelling work, our community and volunteer engagement, and a new piece of work that we call neighborhood impact. And so I've been doing this work here in the Triangle for about 7.5 years. Professionally, I have a background in youth development and community organizing, and enjoy a role now that kind of sees the the aggregate of that experience, put the use in ways that I think make a significant impact in the community that I live in.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Jeff, tell us a little about you.
Hey, y'all. Sam, I think we appreciate hanging out with you far more than you recognize. Nick and I often talk about the great relationship we have with Submittable. So thanks for thinking of us in this opportunity. So Jeff Howell, I'm our Director of Community Investment. So I work directly with Nick on implementing and managing our strategy for investing in traditional 501c3 nonprofits here in Durham, Orange, Johnston, and Wake counties in North Carolina. So right now that looks like 5.1 million across 100 organizations throughout those 4 counties. Vastly different regions, and our response and connection with nonprofits has to be vastly different in response to that. My background, so I was a public school special education teacher for a handful of years here in Durham Public Schools. After that, I went on to be the executive director of a small nonprofit here in Durham. We had a budget of about $500,000, so we were relatively small in the area. And through kind of my own personal equity journey of if this is a place where I should be leading and a space that should be mine, I came into conversation with Nick, and we started talking about the vision that we had for United Way of the Greater Triangle and how we can try to shape philanthropy to be something different and a place where everybody can find their place in philanthropy and engage in that work. So I get the joy of kind of hanging out with Nick and doing some cool stuff every once in a while, and they pay us some money to do it.
Very cool. So let's talk for just a few minutes about the United Way. So we know that NetHope has an international audience, and not everybody may be really familiar with the United Way organization. So maybe just start with a little bit of a description, like what is the United Way? Why are there chapters? Do you guys have the opportunity to sort of select your own, mission and focus areas? Like, give us a little background on the organization itself.
Yeah, I can add some perspective there, Sam. So we are part of kind of a United Way worldwide network. And here locally, local markets have the opportunity to really identify what the key issues are in their geography, and then go about that work in ways that are relevant to and leverage kind of the strengths of that particular community. And so there's a bit of autonomy that exists in the local markets that allow us to move in ways that to best serve our community, but certainly enjoy significant relationships with kind of this broader network. There are advantages to having a brand that's 135 years old and as large as the United Way, but there are also disadvantages. Obviously, I think that brand and recognition gets us conversations that we typically may not have if we were like a newer organization. But with that recognition comes assumptions about who we are and what we do. And so we have the opportunity in those conversations to kind of replace those assumptions with kind of the most relevant description of what our work is here currently. And so it makes for dynamic work and certainly plenty of resources to leverage in pursuit of our mission.
Cool. So what I think I heard you say was you have some leeway to kind of define like the organizations in the community that you work with and what your mission is and your focus areas. So let's transition to that just a little bit. So I think that I understand that United Way sort of has these like 3 sort of major programs, right? Cradle to career, equity and leadership, and healthy families. So maybe one of you could just give us a little bit of an overview of like what those kind of key programs are and like if there's a common thread that runs, among all of those.
You're quiet. I'll go ahead, Nick. So Sam, I think there are the 2 pillars that you'll find as a common thread throughout all United Ways is this work within healthy families, cradle to career, which is traditional United Way work. Healthy families, we're thinking of first trimester to and through college and or career. And then healthy families, we're thinking of a place where everybody can thrive. So we're looking at mental health support specifically associated with the trauma of poverty. We're looking at safe and affordable housing, which I think is top of everybody's mind right now, especially in the Triangle, and then access to fresh and nutritious meals. So those are kind of traditional United Way things that I think folks tend to tie with our name. Where we're able to spin a little bit of our work is this equity and leadership pillar. that our flagship program within that pillar is our 10 to Watch program, which started at this point 5 years ago or so. And we're going into our third cohort of that, where we support 10 BIPOC and or women-led organizations with unrestricted cash and then connections to donors, to corporate groups, to resources, networking. And that's really a correction in our portfolio of how we funded for the previous 130 years, understanding that we were overfunding white-led organizations at a disproportionate rate. And so I think that's where you start to get a little bit of flavor into how United Way of the Greater Triangle is different than every United Way around. And I think we're excited because with Angela Williams as our new president worldwide, and then having conversations across with different United Ways, this seems to be picking up momentum of how to shift philanthropy in the United Way sense.
Cool. So, this sort of theme of like racial justice and equity, as I've poured through like tons of materials on your websites and had lots of conversation with you guys, like I know this is super important to you. And Nick in particular, like you share that one can't be anti-poverty without also being anti-racist. So maybe like elaborate a little bit on that statement and help us understand like the connection between anti-poverty and anti-racism.
Yeah, appreciate that, Sam. If you look at any key data point connected to poverty, and then kind of the correlation to race, it's pretty clear that there are systemic racism issues that are, propping up poverty in our community. And so that approach just means that we pay attention to the correlations of race and kind of these significant life outcomes for the people in the triangle. And, it strategically guides the way that we move forward and the programs and organizations that we invest in. I think it also is pretty clear kind of in the general philanthropic landscape, and even specifically in the philanthropic ecosystem here in the Triangle, that, organizations led by people of color and women are least likely to be represented in kind of these big funding portfolios. And if they are, they oftentimes get, a lesser amount of funding than white-led, male-led organizations. And so just that intentionality from an organizational standpoint kind of has guided some of our activities and opportunities of access and what we measure and define as success when it comes to our grant making.
Yeah, so let's talk about one program in particular. There was a program called the 21-Day Racial Equity Challenge. And I'd love to just hear like a little bit more about that and the results and like kind of how the concept came about, for your organization.
Yeah, I think racial equity was a topic that was, I think, prevalent in communities around the murder of George Floyd, and even before that. And we wanted to provide opportunities for the broader community, for the general community, just to explore what racial equity is, kind of the history attached to race in this country, so that as kind of their knowledge and skill around the topic and their the vocabulary around the topic, improves, they're able to better define what their role is in solving racial equity issues within the Triangle. And then when they see racial equity issues attached to the work that we do, they're better prepared to invest their resources, their time, and their expertise kind of in these community solutions. And so, the Racial Equity Challenge very specifically look to kind of build that capacity in the general community. But, selfishly as a United Way, it prepared people to be able to participate in funding decisions, because we rely pretty heavily on a large group of community members to make those funding decisions here in the Triangle.
Cool. Question from the audience here. How does the use of a tool like Submittable help to surface issues like systemic racism in your organization's processes?
Yeah, and I know we were going to dive into this a little bit later, Sam, but I think using Submittable has allowed us to make this such a more accessible platform for folks to access, right? So when we're looking at removing questions, when we're looking at where we get the greatest impact in terms of folks responding, and then how our community readers can read and evaluate that, we're able to now accept video, audio, photo, previous documents that folks have written on other applications. So we're removing a lot of the double writing that happens in grant making. And I think what we really like to prop up is the storytelling ability of our nonprofits, that in traditional grant making, it's based on who can write their story the best and who has a professional grant writer on their team. But now we're able to allow communities to tell their story through however they're best able to amplify the work of their community and their nonprofit. And so when we allow folks to do videos, we're allowing our community readers to see the work going on. We're allowing them to visualize what it looks like to be a part of this nonprofit and the direct impact that they're having on our most vulnerable neighbors. So I think in the application of actually accepting and evaluating applications, it's a clear, like, we're able to tear down a ton of barriers on that sense. And then I think the systemic racism part of evaluating applications, we're allowing hundreds of community members to see the work of community organizations all over the triangle. And so I think we're starting to familiarize the entire environment around issues that are most prevalent in our community, and then gearing up for conversations. So when we host something like the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge, we're able to support a community-wide effort in changing how we have and talk about systemic racism, how we talk about difficult conversations, and shifting that entire social consciousness of our area.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and certainly want to echo what Jeff said and add kind of an anecdote about the user experience. I think theoretically, as we approach our equitable grant making, we're really thankful for how easy it is on the back end to build an application that is most aligned with the way that we kind of theorize, the way that we want to distribute resources into the community. And in that sense, we're able to really customize an application that is closest to how we want to show up, as opposed to the tool dictating what we can ask, how we can ask it, and kind of helps us achieve our goal of a less burdensome, less bulky experience on the external facing end for our nonprofits, especially for those nonprofits, like Jeff mentioned, without kind of specific dedicated resources to filling out applications and applying for resources from funders like us.
Yeah. So I've spent some time looking at your grant application, and Jeff, you had mentioned the ability to do some sort of non-traditional things like upload photographs and videos and even audio clips. I'm really curious, does that really make an impact for you and for your grant reviewers when you guys are considering an organization? Because we know that so many traditional grant making organizations really rely on the words in the application to make a decision, right? So if you're enabling grant seekers to do some non-traditional stuff like upload photos and tell their story in a variety of ways, are there any examples or anecdotes that you could share with us on how that actually benefits those grant seekers who choose to do something a little bit non-traditional with their application?
Yeah, and I think you'll hear Nick say this a lot too. We can have a tool, but if we're not educating and supporting the capacity for nonprofits to understand the benefit of using this tool, then we're using it to check a box on our side, but we're not actually moving anything forward. So I think it's taken a couple of years for us to reassure folks that there is no lesser value assigned to a video upload as a written upload, because of every grant application that they're a part of outside of this. Whenever we look at organizations best utilizing this platform and utilizing video, it's the 1, 2, 3 person organization who they're working with community 12 hours a day, and to set aside an additional few hours a day to write an application isn't going to function well. And so when they're able to take their smartphone, go out into community, film an actual program going on and the direct service happening, we're able to amplify that story, and that works so much better. And then seeing and being a part of that service and seeing how they're interacting with community also allows us to get that true sense of their relationship with community. I think for a long time, philanthropy has funded programs that have not always had the best relationship in community. And so when we're able to actually lift up organizations that are grassroots, led by folks from that organization or from that community with lived experience that know the actual needs of that community, we think that we're getting closer to the pain and thus closer to the solution to these problems. And so actually, like, our portfolio is so much stronger because of these organizations that are closest to that work. So if anything, this video upload, audio upload allows us to see that work in a much clearer way.
Yeah. So everything that you and Nick were saying is like a perfect segue into sort of this like concept of participatory grant making, right? So this is a practice that has been around for several years, but has been a little slow to catch on until I think, maybe 2019, 2020, when we saw like all of these sort of significant shifts in the way that grant makers are approaching their work and approaching their relationship with the community. And so, participatory grant making is all about bringing in members of the community to play a role in the work that the grant maker is doing, right? And that could be anything from helping to define the top-down strategy of the organization to the actual like in the weeds work of looking at applications and helping to identify those grant seekers, those nonprofits in the community that are, really making a significant impact. And as I learned more about the work of your organization, I was quite honestly just blown away at the level of commitment that you have to participatory grant making. And so, without giving away the punchline, like, you're literally bringing in 500 volunteers from the community to help with this whole end-to-end process. And so let's start at the top and really like dig into how United Way of Greater Triangle is incorporating the community into its work and its decision making.
Yeah, that group of volunteers is really the center of how we make funding decisions here locally. Like you said, we have an open RFP process right now, and we've recruited 500 volunteers, ensuring that every application that we receive get at least 3 reads from those community volunteers, in an effort to really, from an equity standpoint, get as much perspective around the evaluation process as possible. I think it also connects to this idea of participatory processes, whether it be participatory budgeting, participatory grant making. Oftentimes where those efforts fall short is that folks don't prepare people to actually participate at full capacity. And so it also allows us the opportunity with these 500 folks in the triangle, right, to tell them a story of what matters most to us, build their skills around what to look for in these applications, so that when they evaluate, they're making decisions from an informed standpoint, aligned with kind of the values and the ways in which we see our investments best set out. And so that process is kind of not only focused on the local decision making, but I think connects to this broader strategy of how do we like really shift the mental models of folks in the triangle, so that we're really mission aligned and folks are living differently, making decisions differently, engaging with their community differently as a result.
Yeah, I'd really love to dig into this, because I think it's just such a powerful example of how an organization that is looking to make grants and uplift the community can incorporate community members, those with like real lived experience into this process to inform really important decisions around funding. So like, to start, how do you find and engage these 500 volunteers? Like, that seems like a pretty Herculean task just to get a list of 500.
Yeah, well, we started with before I got here, Nick, you had maybe 20 folks that were reading dozens of applications at a time. So I think one, like, capacity, right? Nobody wants to sit down and read 50 applications. And if you are the 49th and 50th application somebody is reading, you're not getting their best attention at that. on our last RFP in 2019 or 2021, we had 300 volunteers, which seemed daunting at the time. And this year, Allison Cobb, our director of engagement, decided that 500 was a go get 'em number. And so I think we all were kind of wide eyed during that, but it really looks like a community process here of we send it out to funded partners, we send it out to nonprofits that we're in relationship with. We send it out through social media. We send it out through our corporate partners, through our private donors, our individual donors, our foundations. So when you look up at the makeup of who these readers are, we are really shooting for a mix of what the triangle has. I think so often philanthropy, the decision-making sits at this closed door table with a few folks who decide where all these millions of dollars are going. And from the very beginning, and I think this is due to kind of our background of working in community, we wanted to completely open that door and make it as transparent as possible to where folks knew how we were making decisions, that it's not always easy decisions, that there are tons of organizations doing incredible work and that there is not unlimited money to do and fund that work. And so we've made some real intentional measurements around data on who these volunteer readers are, race, ethnicity, region of the triangle that they're from, so that we can continue to improve on what that diversity looks like and how we can lift up lived experience in that. And so I think it's a complete team effort, and Nick and I are probably responsible for a small fraction of those 500 readers.
Yeah. And then to add on to the process, right? And so we have these 500 folks kind of do these first pass evaluations, and as a result, we get some statistical data attached to the application. And then we take that data to kind of a group of 15 folks or so that we call our Community Investment Committee. Again, like, a representative group of the Triangle that then takes that data and really makes kind of the difficult decisions in relation to the amount of money that we have to give out, so that there's another pass of kind of community that can work through, some of the limitations of just straight statistical data in terms of decision making, and then that group makes the official recommendation to our board, right? So all along the way, we are kind of using a community centered process around decision making, and it has resulted in some significant changes in the way that we fund and who we fund here in the Triangle.
And so back to that question about how does Submittable help surface issues like systemic racism in our processes? At this point, the only requirement to be a reader for us is that you have access to the internet and that you can read and write in English. And I think we are working on even minimizing those barriers in the coming application processes. But so we have folks who are experiencing homelessness that are receiving services from one of our funded partners that they are going to host kind of reading and evaluation party there. And so, right, we're really trying to push this opportunity and open up the doors for as many folks as we can to participate in our process. And we think our process is that much better for it.
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation that we were having a few days ago, and we were talking about ChatGPT, and I was waxing eloquent saying like, hey, I think ChatGPT is really going to just revolutionize philanthropy and the way that we do our work. And Nick was kind of quick to point out like, hey, don't forget, like not everybody has a laptop, not everybody has access to the internet. So I appreciate that, like as of today, like people are sort of, using technology to get engaged with the organization. It sounds like in the future, you're trying to think of even more ways to like continue to reach out to incorporate the voice of the community, hopefully from like a non-technology or technology agnostic perspective as well. Let's keep going about the process a little bit. Like, so you get these 500 volunteers, like what's the next step? How do I go from like raising my hand and saying I want to be a volunteer to actually getting to the point of being able to like read an application and provide some like input on that?
Yeah, so we work directly with Allison, our director of community engagement, on creating resources where we basically put together a FAQ and training protocol for all 500 of our community readers. We'll host that, we'll provide that. And then when we're talking about leveraging technology, something that we've offered during the RFP process are open office hours multiple times a week where folks can come and ask questions. And this year, we're actually keeping that up and running through the evaluation process. So now our community readers can log in, they can ask us questions one-on-one to make sure that they're putting the best foot forward in the evaluation. It's definitely not like a sign up, here's your link and go. We are there to walk through and be beside them the entire way.
Yeah, Nicholas in the chat is curious sort of about this very process of like how these volunteers get trained, and if like additional technology is needed to ensure volunteers and staff can access the platform. So sort of to your point, Jeff, like there is very much like this, experience that a volunteer has where they do get some training, both in terms of the technology and the review process, right?
Yeah, and we stay in close communication because this is also an opportunity for 500 individuals that we are in close contact with to expand their knowledge about what's happening in the Triangle, tap them into nonprofits in our area that are doing important work, and then continue to follow up to keep them engaged, keep shifting the entire mindset of our Triangle. And so this is really step one for a lot of folks in our relationship with them.
Very cool. So once you've got the 500 volunteers trained and they're in the system, like what happens next? So Nick, you had mentioned, everybody's getting like, 3 applications to review. Like what exactly do I as a volunteer do once I have reviewed these applications?
Yeah, Sam, and I'll back it up a step. Obviously, a scoring rubric is pretty key to that evaluation process. And Jeff has done an incredible job of not only kind of focusing in on the effectiveness of that rubric, but also sharing that rubric with our nonprofit partners way before the application process is concluded, right? So folks can really put their best foot forward and understand how decisions are being made. I think that process also, is important for our readers, so that they can very specifically look for pieces of information in the questions that we ask. To evaluate the most important parts of the story that our partners or our potential grantees are telling. And then so use that rubric as a part of the submittable platform to put in numerical scores for a few questions. And then that scoring then gets kind of summed and attached to a particular application. And that's the data that we take to that community investment committee that I mentioned earlier.
Perfect. So volunteers read through applications. They have the ability to provide some like numerical scoring with a rubric. They can leave comments on an application. Like, I'm really curious, does it actually impact the decisions of your organization, right? Like, is there an example where, maybe you guys have reviewed an application and thought, okay, this is pretty good, but then you like saw the scores and the comments from your reviewers, and it really sort of significantly boosted that application's likelihood of getting accepted?
Yeah. Oh,
hey, Jeff, you got it.
We both had the same exact reaction of shaking our head. And yeah, I mean, it drives our process, right? I think we have intentionally set this up to where it is not Jeff and Nick putting forth their nonprofit friends, and we don't want that story to be the pervasive story that comes out of this. We want the community to drive this entire process. I think it allows us to level the playing field every 2 years. We have new funded partners every year because there's no precedent from year to year on who gets funded. There's no, what was your application like last year? How did you respond to it? What's that opportunity for growing the grant amount, right? That traditional philanthropic relationship is kind of shifted in this sense. I think there have been plenty of organizations that we knew nothing about that have come through community members sharing the application with each other, that then we are now populating hundreds of organizations throughout the Triangle that we had no idea existed, and then building that relationship with them, and allowing folks to understand that the United Way of the Greater Triangle's funding is not a highly restrictive reserved for multi-million-dollar organizations, that we are open. I think that we get applications every time we run an RFP that open our eyes of like, we had no idea this was happening. this incredible leader is doing this work in the community and they've been flying under the radar. How can we help to amplify their work? Did you have a specific example, Nick?
Well, I think that having multiple readers, having as many eyes and readers and scores as possible on each application also allows us to look for the outliers in scoring. And so if there's a score that sticks out, whether it's low or high, in relation to kind of the average attached to that particular application, it just allows us to make better decisions, right? And so, and either toss out that outlier or dive a little deeper and understanding why the outlier exists. And sometimes that may mean follow up with a particular organization, or kind of an intense in-depth conversation at the committee level. But that's kind of the ways that we've used kind of that scoring mechanism to kind of get to the right decision for us.
Right. And then in the spirit of focusing on technology a little bit, I see that you also send out a survey to all of your volunteers after the process to collect, their experience and their learnings, right? So what have you learned through the survey process that has influenced the way that you sort of approach this the next year?
Yeah, well, we probably over survey everyone.
On the front end, we certainly collect demographic information, right? As part of kind of our equity beliefs and foundation, we collect demographic information and then publicly share that information. And so as part of our storytelling process on the back end, we want folks to know exactly who made up that 500 group of volunteers. And then, I think the survey, I mentioned earlier, the benefits to the reader. Certainly, there are benefits to our grant making and to the United Way and to the nonprofits, but we also want to measure the impacts of this process and experience on the volunteers and readers. And so we asked them, are they more knowledgeable of the issues in the area as a result of the process? Are they more knowledgeable of the nonprofit ecosystem as a result of the process? Do they feel better prepared to more fully invest their time, treasure, and talent into community solutions as a result of the process? And so that kind of really illuminates the opportunity we have more broadly, and we've certainly seen very, very positive results in terms of those three questions that we ask folks on the back end.
And Sam, I think Nick and I are sitting here talking about this process now, but it's 100% not us that drives the majority of this work, right? We are surveying nonprofits at whenever they click submit from Submittable and it sends them directly to a survey. We're asking folks at check-in points, at mid-year reports, at end-of-year reporting. We're checking with our volunteers. We're checking in with staff, right? This is an entire community lift on building an equitable, open, accessible application process.
Yeah, totally love it. Sort of a two-part question here in the chat. So the first part I think is for you guys. The second part maybe for me, but the first part is this approach standard across all of the United Way locations?
I think there's a standard approach of involving community readers, not to the extent of 500, and often folks who are seen as experts in a specific field that are reviewing applications and going on site visits. So I think it's normal for folks outside of United Way staff to review applications. I think ours looks and feels a little bit different. Yeah.
And then the second part of the question is, how has Submittable made a unique impact locally in the Triangle versus other locations like Chicago? And I guess the way I would answer that is that the platform, right, like a lot of technology platforms, has a lot of capabilities. And we're talking with Jeff and Nick today because your organization is really taking advantage of the platform's ability to help enable this participatory grant making process, right? But I would argue also is that I don't want to take too much credit here for Submittable, because this is largely process. It's great that the technology enables this, but as a grant maker, you have to be amenable to opening up the process to the community, right? And you have to be receptive to taking those learnings and let them influence the way that you do your work and your giving strategy and how you make an impact in the community. So From my perspective, like, yeah, I'm excited that Submittable enables United Way of Greater Triangle to do this. As a practitioner of philanthropy, I'm more excited that your organization, Nick and Jeff, has chosen to take this approach.
And Sam, I would add on to that. The back end user experience has been incredible for us in this relationship with Submittable. Not only, as I spoke to earlier, kind of how easy it is to turn kind of theory into practice in terms of operationalizing the way that we want to approach it, but also the many conversations we've had with like every corner and department within the Submittable organization, where we really feel like we're able to like express our vision and dreams around grant making. And Submittable seems really open to kind of hearing that and then making adjustments or taking that information as they develop and evolve kind of the product that they offer to nonprofits more generally, right? And we have so much confidence in that experience for us. We've also talked about what does it look like to offer Submittable to local communities and local neighborhoods as a tool for them to make decisions about how resources get distributed, right? So essentially turning local communities and neighborhoods into grant makers, right? And so like if the tool wasn't easy to use and access, we certainly wouldn't envision a time where folks are turning into professional grant makers for a short-term basis. But I think the tool really allows that to really become a reality.
Well, and we went through this whole process of finding a platform that we could use for grant making, right? And I think when we started having conversations, we were speaking the same language and using the same vocabulary. Nick and I weren't calling it trust-based philanthropy at that time because we didn't know what that was. It was just kind of how we operated in relationship with nonprofits. But then being able to come with an idea to Submittable, figuring out a way to use the platform to make it happen has allowed us to kind of shift our mindset into what's actually possible. And then throughout the pandemic, Nick and I both hit this wall of like, we are tired of nonprofits having B-class technology trying to do the most important work in our communities. What does it look like for us as a nonprofit, as a foundation in the community, to be on the cutting edge of technology and supporting our community with that? So I think we're always signing up for beta testing with y'all, with other platforms, just to see what's out there and what's available. And then it allows us to kind of dream up this new reality for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the kind words. And I really sincerely hope that, whatever technology platform grant makers may be using out there, I hope that they can, look to organizations like yours and come to an understanding or a realization that there are like different ways, there's better ways, that grant making is really quickly evolving. Like things are becoming more participatory and more trust-based, right? And they can look to United Way of the Greater Triangle as a real world example of like, not just how you can make that transition, but how it can really, how you can thrive sort of by using these new practices and processes. And Nick, one thing, I know we're almost out of time, the hour is just flying by. And one thing I for sure wanted to cover with you that you touched on earlier regarding like collecting demographic information from your volunteers. You also have a question in your RFP process where you're collecting demographic information from your grant seekers regarding their staff and board, like their race and gender identity. I bring this up for a couple of reasons. The question to you is, I'd really love to hear, like, how is that influencing your work, your grant making, your understanding of the organizations that you're supporting in the community? I also want to give a shout out to our friends at candid.org. They have just announced a new initiative called Demographics via Candid, where they are going to be making that same sort of demographic data about nonprofits available freely to anybody who is interested in being able to access that and use it in their grant making. But Nick, love to hear a little bit about like how those questions actually make an impact in your grant making.
Yeah, great question, Sam. I think we haven't evolved to the point yet in our equity journey in grant making practice to really make decisions around the racial and gender makeup of an entire organization. But I will give you a few examples how we use that information and why I think it's important that we continue to ask those questions. We certainly pay attention to the leadership demographics of an organization, race and gender wise. In our grant making, we create exclusive opportunities for historically and traditionally marginalized leadership in the nonprofit space via Tend to Watch. When it comes down to our larger portfolio, I would venture to say that because we prioritize that kind of representation and that equity work, if applications were similarly scored, we may make a decision, and we can only choose one to be in our portfolio. We may make a decision that prioritizes a historically marginalized leadership demographic. But I would also say, just about influencing our partners, there's an inherent power being a funder where whatever question we ask becomes important, right? For better or for worse. And so if we continuously ask the questions around what is your leadership demographics, what are your board demographics, what are your staff demographics, and start to collect that data, one, we get some pretty good baseline data relevant to the triangle, but it also just, it makes people answer the question. And then that information and that data is front and center in their mind. And if there are opportunities to, decrease some disparities that they see in their own organization, they have the opportunity to do so simply because we asked the question. But I do see us evolving towards kind of a point where we're able to really, make a decision or make decisions that includes not only how well they can write an application and tell their story, not only how impactful they are, but also how they equitably go about their work, right? And how their organization is also aligned with the values that we see are important to eradicating poverty.
Right. Nick, I hate to, I almost hate to ask this question, but I am also super excited to ask it. So you guys are in North Carolina. I live in Arkansas. Both states for sure have like a conservative element to them. And one thing that I have noticed as a trend that has really been emerging over the last just 3 to 6 months is that philanthropy is beginning to get embroiled in the culture wars that have dominated politics and have been, I think, very, divisive for so many. And, being in a conservative state and having these sort of key themes like racial equity, social equity, I'm just curious, does that play a role in any way? Does it, is there any backlash against the work that you guys are trying to do? Do you have to find ways to work around, political opinions, or personal opinions that may say I don't believe the United Way should be focused on marginalized communities? Hard to imagine anybody would say that, right? But, for argument's sake, is that a challenge for you and Jeff and the work of your organization?
Yeah, I'll go first because I'm sure Jeff has some opinions as well. I think when we're talking about the systemic change, not only attached to poverty, but also attached to the way philanthropy shows up, you're going to meet resistance, right? If you are engaged in equity practice and it is easy and free-flowing and free of resistance, you aren't pushing against the margins hard enough. And so we almost expect there to be resistance, questions, pushback when we start to introduce, what we feel is important to, solving some of these deep-rooted issues. We have to certainly, toe the line and have a balance so that we're not excluding folks, but we're also very clear in what we believe in, and then engaging in conversation that exposes folks to new ways of being and learning and kind of knowledge and understanding the community around them. We serve four very different counties. I mean, one county has the capital of the state in it. One's kind of a liberal college town, Chapel Hill, Orange County. Durham has a significant history of Black wealth and influential Black community. And Johnston County is a rural community that I think is further away from those other 3 counties in terms of kind of their operationalizing of kind of equity practice, right? And so it gives us an opportunity in all 4 of those counties to approach and meet them where they are, and really tell different stories. But I think, resistance exists in this movement, no matter where you are. And we certainly have been trying to navigate the challenges, but being clear in what we believe in and what we believe in is going to make this work most impactful, and be consistent in that. We see movement and progress in that sense.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I think, is, so after the murder of George Floyd, we launched our anti-racism community fund, which was a fund directly to support the shift of the environment in the Triangle to become more anti-racist. We hosted public telethons during that, and definitely received calls that were critical of our stance in this work. And we definitely received probably more calls that were applauding the work that we were doing in this space. So I think we often lift up the loudest voice, which tends to be opposing what we're doing. But we also have a bunch of folks in our side that are pushing for us to do this more and more. And then I think we're also experiencing such growth in the Triangle that everybody is feeling a stress now that has been traditionally for communities of color. So when we're looking at communities like Johnston County, there are billions of dollars coming into this county. It's, I think, the 4th fastest growing in the nation. It's the 1st in North Carolina. And so these stressors are becoming deeper and deeper and more widely felt. And so I think it really is an opportunity for us to look at the environment. So we're going to be hosting things like anti-racism trainings throughout the Triangle for a diverse mix of folks, from corporate groups to community members to nonprofit folks, and really getting folks in the room together to have some difficult conversations with the idea of moving this conversation forward across our community. But it's definitely not always easy flowing, Sam.
I can imagine, guys, and I'm super proud that you're doing this really extremely important work out there. With our remaining couple of minutes here, I have one final question for you, and that is around like sort of collecting the learning from all of this amazing work, the engagement with your communities, the engagement with your nonprofits. You guys produce a storybook, and I'd love to just hear, like, what is a storybook? What kind of information are you putting in it? And like, how is this working for the organization in terms of being able to like sort of tell the story of the United Way?
I wasn't sure if you were going to give your smart aleck response here, but go ahead, Nick.
The RFP storybook is a book of stories about our RFP. The idea that in a process from the recruitment and building phase all the way through the decision-making phase, it's a story that we can tell verbally, but it's also powerful to kind of have that documented so that everybody understands, whether it be from the donor perspective or from the nonprofit's perspective, they understand they get a look at the sausage making. And so, and attached to that, obviously, we talked about, sharing and being transparent around our data in terms of race and gender, not only with our volunteers, but also who applies for money, who's awarded money, and not just, the diversity statistics, but also the amount of money according to race and gender, and that are awarded through our grant making. And so it's just a tool to be transparent, and certainly is something that we use to kind of tell the story of our work. And then once people really understand the intentional kind of step-by-step process, the more likely to be engaged, the more likely to see themselves as part of the United Way's network. And so it has worked tremendously in those efforts.
Excellent. Guys, we're just about out of time. So Nick and Jeff, I promised an engaging and informative conversation at the top of the hour, and we've had that. So thank you both so much for sharing your time and your experiences with us. And thanks to NetHope for the opportunity to have this conversation. Seth, I will turn it back over to you for any closing comments.
All right, thank you so much, Sam. I just want to give a major shout out and many thanks to Mr. Allen, Mr. Howell, and Mr. Kaplan for your excellent conversation and for bringing this story of impact to the NetHope community. Your story was a powerful story of digital solution that enables informed implementations of a more inclusive and equitable process, which is much needed and revolutionary in this space. Thank you. Many thanks to our audience for joining us today. Remember, this webinar series needs your voice. You can help us improve this vital resource for the NetHope community by filling out our webinar survey. Links are showing up in the chat, and they will also be in our follow-up email and on the webinar landing page at nethope.org. So check for that follow-up email coming your way in the next few hours for links to the webinar recording, the slides, and other resources. And on behalf of our presenters and NetHope, we wish you a great rest of your day wherever you are in our wide world, and thank you.